Welcome back from your workshops, everyone. I hope you enjoyed them and had a lot of great takeaways that you're all so very excited to implement. But the show goes on, leading into our final workshop of the afternoon before we close out. We are rounding out the final portion of our day. So, in this session, we're going to hear from speakers from cities that have adopted community wealth building strategies, including Deputy Mayor Philip Thompson of New York City, Dr. Eloisa Clementich, President and CEO of Investment Atlanta, Dr. Robert Blaine, Senior Executive and Director, National League of Cities, Institute for Youth, Education, and Families, as well as a message from Atlanta's own Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. So prepare to hear an enlightening conversation about building community wealth and the strategies our communities need to implement in order to succeed moving forward. I am pleased to introduce the moderator for this session, Mrs. Adrienne White. Adrienne's purpose is to inspire others to take action on issues that help the foundation of their well-being. Adrienne's passion is community development, which drives her civic engagement. She's the VP of Government's Guaranteed Lending Relationship Manager at Citizens Trust Bank and serves in a board or advisory role on several Atlanta-based community development and civic engagement initiatives. Let's welcome our moderator, Adrienne White.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Aisha. I'm so grateful for Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative for hosting today's forum and including me as today's moderator for this panel. Panel is Community Wealth Building Strategies in the New Economy, Why These Cities Are Moving for Change. In this session, you'll hear from leaders of organizations that have adopted community wealth building strategies through work with the Democracy Collaborative, as well as independently developed strategies. As Aisha mentioned, hear from Deputy Mayor Philip Thompson from New York City, New York, Dr. Eloisa Clementich, President and CEO of Invest Atlanta, and Dr. Robert Blaine, Senior Executive and Director of the National League of Cities, Institute for Youth and Education and Families. But first, we're delighted to hear from Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who will touch upon community wealth building strategies that Atlanta has employed. Let's cue Mayor Lance Bottoms' message.
Hello, I'm Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I'm pleased to support our partners, Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, in welcoming all of you to the Community Wealth Building Forum. Our administration continues to implement progressive policies and strategic initiatives to address racial and economic inequities. By adopting effective community wealth building strategies, we grow closer to eliminating racial wealth gaps and ensuring a robust local economy with thriving Black and Brown communities. As Audre Lorde reminded us, without community, there is no liberation. Policies that support community wealth building offer a proven approach to disrupt the systemic barriers that contribute to the racial wealth gap. That's why we've developed the One Atlanta Economic Mobility, Recovery, and Resiliency Plan. The vision for the plan is to strategically address income inequality and economic disparities in Atlanta, including disparities among household income, wealth, and savings and homeownership rates. I've also joined a group of more than 30 mayors from across the country called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, working to provide economic security to families and individuals in need of financial support. Utilizing the Economic Mobility Index as a tool and national model, we can measure pathways to better economic and social outcomes by neighborhood. While the pandemic has underscored and at times exacerbated existing inequities in our communities, it's also opened doors of opportunity to create new economic possibilities. As we work to create Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of a beloved community, a community in which everyone is cared for, absent of poverty, hunger, and hate, it's my hope that Atlanta will continue to be a beacon of hope and a mecca of opportunity, ensuring a prosperous future for Black and Brown residents in 2021 and beyond. We are One Atlanta.
And thank you to the mayor, Atlanta's mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, for leading such important work here in Atlanta. Our guests are definitely working towards being a beacon of hope and delivering on a promise of a prosperous future for their respective jurisdictions. Let's start by getting better acquainted with our panelists with the following question. What is the vision for community wealth building strategies that guides your work, and what compelled the interest and pursuit of this vision in your jurisdiction? Deputy Mayor Thompson, let's start with you.
Well, we view our work as part of strengthening democracy. If we go back to the Civil War and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, said, take away from the Civil War, government had to be of the people, for the people. And he said this is really the biggest businesses at the time, which were slave plantations.
Thank you. Dr. Clementich, what would you say the vision for community wealth building that guides your work, and what compelled this interest here in Atlanta?
Well, it's exciting to see the mayor talked about our One Atlanta Economic Mobility Plan, and that's really our focus and our path forward. The way we look at it, there are 13 specific pathways for concentrated areas: economic, education, people, and place. And from there, we have specifically drawn out from there how we're going to get there through our objectives. But to the heart of your question is why? Because on the top of many cities, we love to be on lists, the best place to do business, the busiest airport in the world. But that one list you do not want to be on top of, and Atlanta has consistently been on the top of the list, is the income inequality. And what we see is greater income inequality in the city of Atlanta. And that's something as a community, we've said enough, and we are doing something about it. And the mayor set out the plan, and now we're out to execute.
Thank you. And Dr. Blaine, what would you say your vision or your jurisdiction's vision for community wealth building that guides your work? I think you're on mute.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. You would think that by now we would know where the mute button is, but still slip up every once in a while. But no, prior to my coming to the National League of Cities, I was the Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And our mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, had a very simple way of putting it. He said that if 85% of your city is left-handed, then you need some left-handed jobs. And that's what we've been saying in Jackson. We need to make sure that we have an economy that actually works for all of our citizens. And you know, the process of thinking about how we start to solve for the racial wealth gap really starts for us as starting with from the foundation of economic inclusion, and how do we build policy focused on economic inclusion, and then that moves to economic mobility, and how do we create pathways, durable pathways for economic mobility, and then how does that lead to an eventual state of really being able to focus on the racial wealth gap and how we start to decrease that. One of the things that we've said is that we want to create a serious in racial poverty. And to do that, we have to work communities and make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to be able to make those kinds of progresses.
Wonderful, wonderful. And circling back, you know, everything starts with a vision. So I'm appreciative that you all shared the vision for community wealth building in your respective jurisdictions. But let's get to the meat of it. What are some of the ways that you've seen community wealth building strategies implemented in your cities, either formally or informally? Deputy Mayor Thompson, I think if you're back, let's start with you.
Can you hear me now?
Clearly, thank you.
I'll give two things we've done recently. One is we started a program called Owner to Owner that provides up to $10,000 to workers who want to buy the companies they work for and turn them into employee-owned cooperative companies. And we have about 70 businesses right now that are in the pipeline for this. And we think we're doing outreach to a lot more. And if you look at manufacturing in New York City, there are 40,000 manufacturing companies. 80% of the owners are near retirement, and most don't have buyers for their businesses. And 82% of the workers are people of color. So we see this as an opportunity to help not lose those businesses, but transition them into Black and Brown owned businesses that are positioned to really grow in manufacturing as the city does more and more local manufacturing with advanced manufacturing coming on board. The second thing we've done recently is mandated that 30% of all of our construction jobs, city funded construction jobs, go to people who live in public housing or reside in zip codes of 15% or higher poverty. And we're now pushing for state legislation that would extend this to all city contracts with private businesses. And that'll create 40,000 job opportunities every year for our hardest hit neighborhoods. So those are two things we're doing right now.
Those are some strong strategies. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Clementich, would you like to share some strategies that you've seen implemented here in Atlanta?
Of course, be happy to. So as I mentioned, we have our 4 basic areas of pillars. Within each of those, we have a total of 13 specific pathways that we're following. Those pathways lead into 4 basic areas of objectives. And in those objectives, we have focused on affordable housing, small business, good and promising jobs, access to the job, and the neighborhood impact. And then specifically, then we drill down into each of those about how are we creating jobs. So we have to bring 6,000 middle wage jobs. So for the first time, we're very keenly focused on not the high level job, but the middle wage. So for us, that's anywhere from $40,000 to $80,000. And we're going to measure our success on those jobs. Then we're looking about access to the jobs. How are people going to be able to access? So do we attract the job? And then once the company, then we have to ensure that they get the job. On the affordable housing units, we want to raise $1 billion in affordable housing. That's specific between us and all of our partners. And then lastly, on neighborhood impact, it's about how do we create and bring about new funding opportunities to these neighborhoods. So the mayor's path and her vision is very clear. How do we identify it? How do we create the path? And then how are we measuring ourselves? Because at the end of the day, we all want to make sure we're moving the needle.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I look, as an Atlantan, I look forward to the results. And Dr. Blaine, what about you? You're kind of in a transitional period where you're taking things you've found successful in Jackson and hopefully scaling them to the nation. So what have you seen?
That's right. And I think one of the important things to understand in a city like Jackson, we're in the deep South, and Jackson, as I said in the opening, is an 85% Black city. An 85% Black city, but only 37% of the businesses in the city of Jackson are Black owned. And further, when you look at that 37% of we call minority-owned businesses, 42% of that are owned by white women. So when you look at the total number of Black businesses, you're looking at less than 20% of the entire climate of businesses in the city of Jackson. And so what we've really said is that we need to focus on a strategy of economic development and workforce development. How are we focusing first on the policy level as the city, and how are we deconstructing a set of policies that were actually erected to reinforce segregation and reinforce the inability of Black businesses to compete? And so we've been really focused on on building policies that deconstruct that organizational structure. The second thing is that we've really focused on access and how are we building access points for businesses to grow and to scale in Jackson. And so we've done that through a partnership with both the Kellogg Foundation, Goldman Sachs, and the Rockefeller Foundation, where we're accelerating, making sure that we have access to capital for Black businesses, really making sure that there's capital that's available for growth and being able to increase the capacity of those businesses. We've also providing technical assistance to those businesses, what we call just-in-time supports. So making sure that they have uh, income tax support when they need it, making sure that they have accounting support when they need it, legal support when they need it, marketing support when they need it, et cetera. And then finally, making sure that there is a workforce that is primed and ready, trained in order to be able to inhabit those jobs. And so we partnered with the Aspen Institute to develop a workforce ecosystem that was focused on the city of Jackson. What we wanted to do was to then build an infrastructure so that the economic development of the city aligned with the workforce development. So as we were saying before, if you have an 85% left-handed city, you need some left-handed jobs.
Wonderful. As a fellow left-handed person, I love all this focus on jobs for left-handed people. To our next question, the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative often notes that community wealth building strategies are not new or radical. They're often derived from historical and cultural practices in communities of color. Does this statement resonate with you? And if so, how do current community wealth building systems draw upon these traditions? And in what ways does your work keep neighborhoods and the people who live in them at the center of your work? Because AWBI focuses on Atlanta, I'd like to hear from you first, Dr. Clementich.
Yeah, that's a key question for us, or it's a key comment. I think the biggest thing that we have to remember is that at the heart are equity and being the place where civil rights was born, we have to understand and keep the focus on everyone in the community. We need to meet people where they are. And so it's not only creating programs, I think, that are specific, targeted, but it's meeting people where they are, when they are. And so for us at the heart, it's how do we create those type of programs, understanding who has not been able to benefit from years and years of a lack of disinvestment. So when we need to focus in on certain parts and communities, we do it through tools and analysis. We know where these individuals are. We're focusing in on these communities like we never have before. And really, it's the concept of, where do I need to meet you at? What programs do I need to be able to create? And so now that we've identified the path, we know the programs, we're aligning funding, which is the last component, to ensure that we can really deliver success. And by those kind, I just do a quick example. When we think about when we are attracting a company, we're going to attract every company. We'll welcome you to the city of Atlanta, but then we want to say, we think equity is a shared responsibility. We would like for you to help us in this equity effort that we have. And they will say yes. And then we would say, okay, we will offer some incentives. But then what we do is we say, we need you to hire individuals in this community with these type of skill sets. And we send them a whole bunch of individuals. They can choose who they want, but then we hold them accountable at the end. So it's a full circle. It's all of us together as a community, and it's understanding that equity is a shared responsibility that we all have to partake in to really move the needle.
And just a follow-up on that, what does accountability look like when one of the partners may not be delivering on the overall promise, the collective promise?
Well, at the end, we want to make sure we're working with people. So we have to understand where the company is. But we would say, if you've made this commitment, then we would like for you to follow through. Now, for some reason, they're not able to. No fault of their own, that's one situation. But if they come back to us and say, no, I just don't want to, which we've never had the case, then, luckily in our incentive programs, we do have some clawbacks. But I have to tell you, in my years of experience, I have not had to use those because fortunately, people come, and I believe most people are good. People are good and they want to make a difference. They want to help communities and neighborhoods. They may not know how to do it. That's obviously what I found is sometimes they'll say, oh, I'm looking for individuals to take the jobs. I just can't find them. Yeah, but where are you advertising? What community groups are you working with? So we help them to identify those groups and to be able to reach the community they're looking for. And it's ultimately, I find that once we step in and help, we're able to solve the issue because at the end, that's what we want. We want you to be successful. We want you to hire individuals.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that follow up. And I know Atlanta's taken on a bold initiative to make sure that we do focus on workforce development to remove the excuse that there aren't people to hire. Because we know in a city like this, there is plenty of talent. We've got some of the best schools in the nation right here at home. So I really appreciate that work and all these partners coming to the table with good intention and being purposeful on really taking workforce diversity and equity to heart. So thank you for that. Dr.
You're welcome, Adrienne.
Blaine.
I'm going to highlight what you said. It's taking and being purposeful. So yes, totally agree.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Blaine, can you share how some current initiatives are really born out of the historical and cultural practices, especially in Jackson, and how you made sure that you're rooted in keeping people in their communities, yet still providing with opportunity? One thing that I always harp upon is making sure that people, no matter where they live, have agency and access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a long history of cooperative businesses in the Black community, and we've worked as a community cooperatively for a long time. One of the things that we saw, of course, when COVID struck was that the inequalities and disparities that we've seen in our communities, of course, were greatly exacerbated by the challenges of COVID. And we started to look at what that meant for access for our communities, and then to think about how we could use that as an opportunity to actually build competency that the city didn't have before. So one of the challenges specifically in Jackson is that the traditional telecoms have not seen a return on investment in investing in infrastructure for telecommunications in South and West Jackson, which are two of the lesser invested parts of our city. What we did as a city was we created a partnership between the public school system, the city, and the Kellogg Foundation. And what we did was we leveraged our municipal and in order to create a free over-the-air broadband network that connected 3,500 students in JPS that didn't have access to broadband. Now, that was one initiative, but the thing about that is that it created an infrastructure that we could then leverage to use for workforce development, specifically in the parts of the city that we needed it the most. And so we partnered with a set of daycare centers around the city focused on early childhood education. And we then partnered with the Sesame Street Corporation, and we were able to deliver content into those daycares focused on emotional security during that people were at their most emotionally fragile. The last piece is that this network created an internet service provider, and that ISP we're now rolling out as a cooperative that would actually be owned by the community. And so by leveraging infrastructure and creating the partnerships that we needed, we were able to support the business culture and growth that we wanted to see in the business culture, and also create an infrastructure that allowed for the community to own the resource and the community to be able to design and focus on the benefit of that resource.
I love that example because it almost speaks to unintended opportunity where you were really focused on delivering broadband to education, students, because wow, it's been quite the challenging year. But as we somewhat wind down on this COVID environment, access to the internet, broadband has been increasingly important for workforce development, whether it be training or, COVID has forced a lot of people to bring their businesses online, and it's just been a barrier. So I really appreciate that concept of unintended opportunity and hope that organizations and cities and different jurisdictions continue to think through where did we really win in one area and how can that translate elsewhere. And if you have another thought, you can always circle back. But I want to ask this question now to Deputy Mayor Thompson, because he started out talking about the co-ops, and that was really exciting. And I think just historically, African American communities have bonded together and really helped each other. And the city is doubling down on that effort and saying, we're going to provide incentives and infrastructure for you to do so. So can you tell us more about any other strategies related to cultural, leveraging historical and cultural practices in communities of color, and what you're doing to make sure that your work keeps neighborhoods and the people who live in them at the center of your work?
Sure. Well, as Dr. Blaine said, Black folks have a long history of cooperation and cooperative efforts. And Tuskegee University was actually built by students who formed a brick making cooperative, and they literally made bricks as students, sold bricks, and that's how that college got built. And Black churches got built all across America right after slavery by very poor people by passing the plate. My dad was a preacher, and we passed the plate and built a new church in Philadelphia, something Black folks have always done. So we're looking to apply some of those same strategies to expand community ownership. So instead of just selling city land to private developers, we are now promoting land trusts so that communities can actually own city-owned land and be co-developers on that land and not just have it be the private sector. We also see this as a anti-displacement measure, so people aren't less frequently displaced by real estate speculators. We're also taking a similar approach, promoting community own microgrids as we try and build more and more locally generated energy so that communities can benefit from producing their own energy. A lot of the big companies want to expand 5G, particularly in Midtown Manhattan and other really very lucrative areas to sell 5G services. But in New York City, in order to sell 5G in Midtown Manhattan, you're going to have to light up 5G and provide access in the poorest sections of the city, or else you're not going to get to go into Midtown Manhattan. We are also working with communities and encouraging them to form what we call community collective bargaining units. And that is community organizing for people to buy collectively things that most folks buy, like cell phones, diapers, and other things, so they can get better prices. And we're encouraging them to take a portion of those savings so that they can support their own lobbying and own policy advocacy, because we think it's important to think about Black economic development, not as just individual families and individual businesses, but we have to strengthen our capacity of our community to have a voice in public policy and in our democracy. Because only 1% of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. represent poor people or labor unions combined. 50% of them represent corporations, and that's not democracy. So we got to figure out how to finance our own movement building too. So Black Lives Matters all the time, not just once every 10 years or once every 20 years or once a generation.
I love that, and it's firing me up. There's definitely contrast between the environment in New York and, say, the environment in Georgia, where oftentimes we find that when we are advocating for more inclusive policies and more access, it really we end up having to go to the business community to make a case, and having them apply pressure. What strategies would you offer up to make sure that people understand the value of inclusive policy making as it relates to centering people and meeting them where they are? Because we need some of that advice here in Georgia.
Is that to
Well,
me?
if you don't,
Oh,
Oh,
yes, sorry.
Dr. Blaine.
Deputy Mayor Thompson, yes. And then Dr. Blaine, if you'd like to address that, and Dr. Clemente, if you'd like to as well. So,
Well, I'm
Deputy
in
Mayor
local
Thompson.
government, and we are thinking of local government as a tool for the oppressed, as a weapon for the marginalized, not as a neutral body whose job it is to just kind of like mediate and settle conflicts. So we are 2 days ago, the mayor announced the formation of a charter revision commission for racial justice, and the city's charter is our local constitution. And so we're going to look at ways to actually change how the law that governs all of our agencies to really get at the roots of racial injustice. And so our approach is, with dealing with, big businesses or other big interests is we're not, taking a hat in hand, please do this, please do that. We are organizing our power as we are the market. 85% of New Yorkers are people of color and women. So when we say MWBE, we're not talking about 15% of the population, we're talking about 85%. And so if you don't want to do business with us, you don't want to do business in New York City. And we're organizing people to say, don't put your money with companies that don't support your interests. And let's not give our money away. Treat every dollar the same way you do a vote. You don't vote for Trump with your dollars. I mean, with your political votes. So don't vote for Trump supporters with your dollars. And that's the kind of mentality we're building in New York. That we're the majority, and nationally, by the way, people of color are the rising majority, and we're just not going hat in hand anymore.
I love it. It's really taking the voice and celebrating the workers, putting the workers, because a business that can't survive without labor and really the voice of people. So I really appreciate that. Dr. Blaine, do you have thoughts around how to really bring this to life, given that there are certain forces that make this harder? It makes it harder to really bring policies to the forefront that advocate for people where they are.
yeah, no, I just want to, give an amen and a +1 to Deputy Mayor Thompson. I really love what he had to say, and what's so interesting is that in a place like Jackson, there are city ordinances that were erected specifically to reinforce the lines of segregation and to disadvantage growth of Black businesses. There are also some businesses that have taken advantage, some Black businesses that have taken advantage of some of the dysfunction in the system, and there are a couple of some small businesses that actually benefit from the dysfunction that actually is to the detriment to the large part of the community. So there's a process called pass-throughs, where you could have a minority company that actually serves as a pass-through for a majority firm. And essentially what we're doing is we're creating Black businesses that are willing to accept the crumbs that fall from the table rather than actually having a seat. And so when we start to think about how municipal codes are erected and how it actually benefits that process of accepting the crumbs, what we've said is that no, we need to create a system where everybody has a seat at the table. And we need to focus policy to make sure that we can enforce that as a city. One of the practices that actually makes that happen is many cities have, what they call minority business programs or plans that are essentially riders that are on the side of a contract. They're not within the actual four corners of the contract. And so what we've said as a city is, number one, any rules around minority engagement has to be built within the four corners of the contract so that it's enforceable by the city. But even more than that, we're taking 10% of our discretionary spending and creating a sheltered market that's only for Black and brown businesses. And that sheltered market is then connected to this business accelerator. So we actually want to use a city contract as a leverage point for businesses to grow. We want to be able to create the supports that would allow those businesses to scale, because they need to have a seat at the table and not accept the crumbs that fall from the table.
You are right on point, and it's something that I've definitely seen. To your point, there are some Black-owned businesses that they do have their seat at the table. And quite honestly, one question that I keep asking in spaces that I'm in is for that next generation, the emerging businesses that are often, they kind of get their foot in the door through the JV structure, but they just need some more of those support. So I really appreciate how you expounded upon ways to make that happen institutionally rather than just by chance or hoping for it, because hope is not a strategy. Dr.
That's right.
Klementich, you have thoughts about how we can kind of push through some of those barriers to making sure that we really are focusing on the workers and the people that, we say we're trying to help, but sometimes there are just forces that are resistance to that.
Yeah, I love the comment that we had said about meeting people where they are. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So it's not only, and I know Goodwill says this a lot, and I cannot agree with them more. It's we get someone a job, get them a good job, and then get them a better job. And it's this idea of a pathway, this continuum. So it's not about we need to get you a job, then we upskill you and provide you training opportunities so then you can earn a higher wage. Because as I've said, we cannot build our way out of the need of affordable housing. We have to empower someone. So to your point, Adrienne, we got to ensure that people are given the skills that they need so they can begin to earn that higher wage, so they can follow their entrepreneurship dreams if that's what they want to do. And so for us, it is super exciting that beginning July 1, we are going to integrate the work source function or the workforce development function into Invest Atlanta. We will be one of the very limited groups that have the three verticals under one roof: economic development, community development, and workforce development. And the reason we're doing that is we are going to have alignment. We are all going to focus on the same star moving forward, and we're going to hold each other accountable to each other's success. And I think that that's going to be crucial in our delivery at the end of the day, which will be meet people where they are and help them find the opportunity, whether it be in entrepreneurship or whether it be in skill sets in a job, whatever it is they want, we will meet them where they are.
Wonderful, thank you. We've talked a lot about things that have been put in place, and given the challenges and opportunities ahead, how do you think community wealth building strategies can further be leveraged to build pathways to shared prosperity, community wellness, and to close the racial wealth gap? So more of a future focused question, and I'll start with you, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Well, I would say something on the business side and something on the community worker side. So on the business side, one of the things we started doing before the pandemic was we gave a list of what the city buys to a Black city in Colombia, South America, and to the Economic Development Office of Accra, Ghana. And we buy $50 billion a year of goods and services in New York City. And we asked those cities to tell us, what companies do you have that actually provide these kinds of goods and services? We buy 200 million meals a year just to feed our public education school students in New York City. We don't grow bananas in New York. We don't grow peaches. And then we identified a list of MWBEs in New York City that are actually in the same lines of business as those businesses identified in Cali and Accra. And then we started having business meetups like dating services and saying, why don't you all form joint partnerships and go after some of these contracts? Because most of our money doesn't go to MWBEs because a lot of MWBs just don't have the right connections or supply chains to be able to compete in those areas. And we started getting inquiries from Jamaica, from Trinidad. But I listening to Dr. Blaine from Jackson, Mississippi, it makes me think, why aren't we doing that kind of collaboration across cities in the US where we're together helping to fill those gaps, and putting Black businesses, Latino businesses, women into those areas, right? That's something we haven't done, but we absolutely can do. And the other thing we're doing is on the community side is we're looking to partner with labor unions, with other organizations. I mentioned community collective bargaining. The more people you get to buy things and leverage things together, the more power you have vis-a-vis a Google or an Amazon or anybody else when you want to bulk purchase goods. So we see this as something that can be expanded, and we can do this in solidarity with each other and then figure out like how to divide up the savings so that we can have our own resources to reinvest back in our communities.
That's definitely powerful. And Dr. Blaine, knowing that you've kind of taken that jump from focusing on a city to an organization that really tries to connect many cities, what do you think can be done to leverage community wealth building strategies so that way people are prosperous?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give a short-term answer that I think is an opportunity that is on our doorstep. One of the things that the National League of Cities lobbied for in the new American Relief Plan is direct funding for cities. Dollars over $350 billion that are total, that is the total amount in that relief plan that is designated for cities, is direct funding to cities. So a city like Birmingham, Alabama gets a direct check for $146 million. Now, this is a huge opportunity, and it also creates a challenge because cities have structures that are erected specifically for times of austerity. We are strong at being able to pivot when we see budget shortfalls. But many cities are not positioned well for infusions of cash. And for us to be strategic about using infusions of cash in order to be able to create transformative opportunities for communities that have been historically disadvantaged. So when we think about COVID and the communities that have been most impacted by COVID, this American Rescue actually presents an opportunity for cities to start thinking strategically about how they're creating investments in communities that are going to create long-term growth. And one of the things that we're excited about at the National Cities is to be able to work with cities to be able to plan on how they can use those infrastructure funds and then to help them to execute on those plans. And then finally, to develop the data to be able to, number one, give a pre-assessment of the impact of those dollars, and then to give a post-assessment of what the impact was of those dollars and how cities were able to use those dollars to create impact and community it the most. I think this is an incredible opportunity. And I think it's the first step of a multi-step dance. The next piece that the administration has talked about is an infrastructure bill. This aligns exactly with what Dr. Clementish was talking about we're aligning workforce development, economic development. We're focusing on the communities that need those jobs, and we're building that into the infrastructure that we're using in order to be able to create the new jobs for tomorrow. As the mayor here in Jackson would say, our goal is to use our infrastructure as a launching pad for the community investment that we want to have and the jobs that are going to be sustainable and that are going to create a living wage for our residents.
Thank you. And what I really appreciated about what you brought up is, in light of this infusion of cash, I think it is an opportunity to think creatively and plan for the future. And I've seen instances where rather than thinking of, wow, what can we do? What do we have the opportunity to do? We kind of default to tax cuts. And, it's not that's not necessarily the most creative strategy. So I really appreciate how this influx of cash presents what some people call a challenge, because, it's like more money, more problems, but it's really more money, more opportunity. And I'm really excited to see what different cities do with that opportunity. Dr. Clementich, when it comes to, I don't know if we've started pondering what to do with that infusion of cash and or the intersection with Invest Atlanta, but if you have any insights of what's coming down the pipeline with that, I'd love for you to share. And or, you can also just talk about different ways that Invest Atlanta is going to approach community wealth building strategies in the future beyond kind of the full integration of economic development, community development, and workforce development.
I would say two things. I'll answer your first question is partnerships are going to be key to our success. We cannot do it alone. That for me is key. One, I don't have enough people, time, money. And so how do we leverage the strength and the expertise of our partners so that we all can reach that same goal? I think that's something we have to continue to do, that I'm continuing to do. I look to the Metro Atlanta Chamber. I'm very proud of their equity statement. They're pushing a lot of our Fortune 500s to sign an equity statement. That's a first step to at least acknowledge and say, yes, I'm in. Then we look to the United Way and the Community Foundation about how are they investing their dollars? How do we align that investment? And look to groups like the Candida Foundation and how do we ensure that we all are pushing in the same direction? And then my last dream is if we can have a shared metric. And I've really relied on the United Way and their work on the child index, because I think if we can all look and measure our success, like I understand we all will have our own individual metrics, but we all have to be accountable as a community to one metric. And I think if we could all agree that that is going to lead our way forward, I think as a community, we're really going to see the impacts that we want. In terms of the new funding and what we have coming down for the American Recovery Plan, we are excited about what we are going to suggest to use those funds. So we're looking in several areas into loans and grants for small businesses. We're looking at partnership opportunities in terms of providing the education that wrap around. It's not just enough to give a business the funds, in my personal opinion. Some businesses can take it and run and be successful, but truly it's those that I've seen with the greatest success that have that network around them to ensure the success and the implementation, not just of short-term impact, but long-term change. And that's what we're looking for, is let's leverage this one-time funds to make long-term impact for some of our businesses. And that's what we're looking to do. And it also empowers our partners that also need and have been suffering for COVID. So it really is, in my opinion, a win-win situation. So those are the key areas that we're looking for. And within that small business, I'm talking the spectrum from at-home businesses to startups to those that have been in this community for years. My legacy businesses that I want to continue to protect and ensure their success in our city.
And I think that's so important, given that I'm sure in earlier sessions, AWBI laid out some of the statistics, particularly in Atlanta, around Black-owned businesses and how there is a wealth gap within the business community, and how many are really single owner, single employee businesses. And really, when you're talking about wealth type of businesses, they employ more than one person. So I totally agree with that there needs to be a focus on how do we support businesses with technical assistance to make sure that they've got access to grow and not just capital. Because sometimes you can have all the money in the world, but if you're not equipped to really use that, you can stumble along the way. So I appreciate that. We've talked about challenges and looking forward to the future. And I really think the challenge of our lifetime, I hope, thus far, because we're almost through it, is this pandemic. Dr. Blaine, how has the pandemic context affected your efforts to establish community wealth building in your jurisdiction, Jackson? And what's been particularly challenging, but also where have you had breakthroughs? I mean, I definitely listened to you and you said we solved broadband for schools and now we're going to transition this to workforce development. How else has this pandemic really challenged you? And I always find that through challenge, we find our strength. So hopefully you're on the other side or coming through and emerging stronger and smarter and more efficient.
No, I love what you said. You know, we already knew where the inequities were in our communities. They weren't hard to find. And one of the mayor and I about is um, that we landed on this idea of an economic model of human dignity was because you can look at Jackson and cities like Jackson, what we called economic models of humiliation. So when you look at blight and crime and poor educational outcomes and lack of opportunity, essentially you're seeing economic models of humiliations of communities. And what we said was we wanted to create an economic model that was focused on the inherent dignity of every citizen. That includes communities that have been historically disinvested. And I love what Dr. Clementis said about these networks. And so one of the things that we're doing as the National League of Cities is we're currently embarking on a partnership between the Kellogg Foundation, the Casey Foundation, and the Atlanta Federal Reserve to bring together a network of 28 cities across the South, all based on what I call the first step towards racial wealth building, which is around economic inclusion. And how do we work with cities to make sure that they are creating infrastructures for economic inclusion and they are creating the policies that are exacerbated. We have a real opportunity as we're moving forward here, and leveraging these networks to create that kind of growth is a huge opportunity that we can use moving forward.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And I think AWBI has definitely been instrumental at convening people here in Atlanta. And there's always squirrels working on uncovering all their little goodies from the winter, and we just need to bring all of those chestnuts to a collective pot so that way we can all build off that. And so I just want to give kudos to AWBI for really spearheading some of that convener work, because we are stronger together. A cliche term now from 2016, but it it is just a truth. And speaking of Atlanta, when we talk about the different challenges and how the pandemic has affected us, Dr. Clementich, can you share more about what you've seen done here in Atlanta, particularly with Invest Atlanta or beyond Invest Atlanta, and how we persevered through this challenge? Uh-oh, you're on mute.
My dog was barking. I forgot. Adrian, I just want to echo what you said. AWBI has been phenomenal at being able to bring people together, and really just want to thank them for their leadership in Atlanta. I'm proud to say that they're in Atlanta. I will answer that. I think the COVID for me and for Invest Atlanta has really been this opportunity of a reset. And it's a reset time to not just reset and go back to where we were. I'm not going back. It wasn't working. And so what are we going to do different moving forward? But it was this time to kind of go, because sometimes you just become so focused on the job and what you're doing and moving so fast. This has really made us just rethink what is important in life, what is important to business, what's important to family, to us personally, and to the businesses and the individuals in our city. So how do we say, what didn't work before? I'm not going back to that, because people have said, oh, we're going to go back into the office. Well, we may be physically back, but we're going to come back different. And it's that mindset. We need everybody to start to think about, what are we going to do different now that we've have a different lens to the situation we're in. And so finding this COVID opportunity to say, let's do things different. Let's, from communication to interaction to how we deal with businesses to the services that we bring. And so those are the things that we're taking advantage as a team, is let's figure out what are we going to do different moving forward, because at the end of the day, we have to meet people where they are, and we have to create an equitable city in Atlanta.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Deputy Mayor Thompson, New York was one of the first cities hit pretty darn hard by COVID-19. And wow, you guys have been through it for sure. So can you talk about a little bit about that challenge and how you all have approached really rebounding on the and coming out on the other side? And quite frankly, sometimes the rebound does not happen as quickly as we'd like it to, but surely there's been some lessons learned, and we've seen how inequities have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I'd love to learn more about what you've seen in New York and what's to come as a result of the pandemic.
Well, as you said, New York was the epicenter for COVID death, and twice as many Black and Latino people died proportionally as compared to the white community. And it's been really hard and tragic. The reason why so many Black and brown people died was because our communities were disproportionately sick to begin with all kinds of chronic illnesses. And some of us knew this for a long time, but there hadn't been really, enough effort put into dealing with these disparities for many decades. One of the things that caused disparate rates of chronic illness was really poverty. And poverty is very expensive when you actually have to deal with the consequences of it, which we see in our healthcare system. And so one of the lessons from New York is that it makes a whole lot of sense, both from a humane and moral standpoint, but even from a financial standpoint, to get rid of poverty and to give people access to healthcare, so that we don't end up paying for it, on the other end when folks are running in and out of the emergency room. And, the same thing can be said for our seniors. And we're going to be 20%, elderly very soon in New York City. Like, we got to focus more on prevention and keeping people out of the hospital, as opposed to like paying for it when people get sick later. So there are going to be a lot of good jobs created in New York around community health improvement, wellness, treat versus sickness. There are also going to be a lot of new jobs created through green infrastructure. We have 520 miles of coastline, more than all the other cities on the West Coast, East Coast combined. And the oceans are rising. So there's got to be massive infrastructure spending in New York. We have 900,000 buildings that need energy retrofits to save money on carbon. Money and to reduce our carbon load. So there are going to be all kinds of jobs and business opportunities. And we have 500,000 young people, predominantly people of color, in our community colleges and public university system. So if we actually focus on preparing our young people for these future opportunities and jobs, we are confident we can eliminate poverty in New York City. I'm serious, eliminate it. And that's our goal here.
That's a beautiful goal. And I always love, from my days of leading Black Girls Run here in Atlanta, I always emphasized that healthcare, let's put the care back into healthcare, because oftentimes it is sick care. So I appreciate y'all's focus on that. While I have your attention, Deputy Mayor Thompson, can you talk about your partnership with the Democracy Collaborative? And then we will go to a closing question because we've got less than 5 minutes, y'all. It's been a great conversation.
Well, I started working with the Democracy Collaborative actually in Cleveland many years ago, when we were working on, how to leverage hospital spending to create more economic opportunity in low-income communities surrounding hospitals. And so we took that approach into Central Brooklyn, and we organized the community to save 3 hospitals, which are now community-run hospitals in Central Brooklyn. And We brought in a Black business from California to help innovate on how we create new ways of maintaining hospital equipment and providing just-in-time hospital equipment delivery to different hospitals and training community people on how to maintain that equipment and so forth, like so that we integrate healthcare with economic development. So that's where I started with the Democracy Collaborative, and we just continue to collaborate on coming up with new ideas and new approaches.
I kind of want to come up to New York and steal you down here to Georgia, because we've had several rural hospitals close over the last several years, and some of these strategies you're talking about would definitely solve that. Pardon me?
Can I just say the workers in the hospital, with the support of community clergy and electeds, locked out the hospital administrators and forced the governor to come to the table, and that's how they got control of these hospitals. So it was old-fashioned community organizing. I just want to say.
That's beautiful. You've seen the power of what Georgia can do when we start to organize. This past election cycle, I'll just leave it at that.
That's right.
In closing, what would it take to make community wealth building the preferred paradigm for economic development in your city? Because we have just 2 minutes, we'll say it the city, and if you have any other closing remarks on that, please do share. And Dr. Klementich, we'll start with you.
Well, we're in. So Atlanta's in, we're committed. I have a mayor, I have a board, I have everybody shooting toward that same star, and I have awesome partners like AWBI and everybody else. So we're in. Atlanta's in.
Wonderful. Dr. Blaine, how can we make community wealth building strategies the preferred paradigm for economic development in your city, whether that be Jackson or as you try to leverage those strategies it's your new role?
Well, as Deputy Mayor Thompson said, poverty is extremely expensive. And investing in anti-poverty work, especially around the racial wealth divide, is an investment in the growth of your community. It's really a strategy on raising the entire economic environment in a community, and it has so many ripple effects. The strength of a community happens when it's able to retain talent. And so when a community creates talent and is able to retain it, it creates growth in communities, and the high tide raises all the boats. And one of the things that I think that community wealth building does is it creates both an asset-based strategy, and it defeats a narrative about a zero-sum game. What it means is that a growing pot means that all members of the community can thrive, can survive, as opposed to pitting groups against each other and saying that if I win, then you lose. So it's about this community wealth building that's all about bringing the entire community together.
Thank you. And I see that our session is just over, but Deputy Mayor Thompson, do you have any final remarks?
Well, I just fully support what the other two speakers just said. Mayor de Blasio is fully committed to what we're talking about right here. It does help to have a mayor that actually believes in what we're talking about. And beyond that, I just think we have to work more closely together. And I really thank you and the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiatives for pulling this together. We're on the same path and didn't even know it. With Jackson, Mississippi, with you folks in Atlanta. So, we should just be more in connection with each other.
Thank you. And I echo that, knowing that Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, really its strength is on convening strong voices, creative ideas to ultimately solve the racial wealth gap here in Atlanta. We need collaboration. We need these type of ideas. So I greatly appreciate this session. I've learned a lot. I'm kind of energized. I want to go forth and be great. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time this afternoon, and to all of the viewers, we hope that you enjoyed this spirited conversation, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.